In this video, we'll see the basics of managing Docker containers using Terraform. So the first thing I'm going to do is to make sure that I have Docker installed on my system, and I'm going to do that using snap. I'm on Ubuntu, so snap is probably the easiest way to get Docker. So let's run sudo snap install docker, and as you can see, for me Docker is already installed. Now we're going to install Terraform. So let's open our web browser, and here I'm going to look for Terraform install. And I'll click on the first link from developer.hashicorp. And here from the side menu, I'm going to choose Linux as my operating system. As I said, I'm on Ubuntu, so I'm making sure that Ubuntu is the selected option. Then we need to run these commands. So let's copy them and let's run them. And everything was installed. And now we should be able to run Terraform-v. And we can see that Terraform was installed, and this is the version that I'm using. Next, I want to create a folder for our Terraform files. So let's run make directory, and I'm going to name this directory Terraform Docker. Let's now go back to Visual Studio Code, and let's open the new folder we just created, and here it is. And in this folder, I'm going to create a new file, main.tf. Now I'm going to go back to my web browser, and in the Terraform website, I'm going to choose tutorials. And as you can see here, there are tutorials for a few providers. I'm going to choose the Docker tutorials. And from these tutorials, we're going to choose the third one, the one that's called Build Infrastructure. And if we scroll down a bit, we can see this Terraform code. So let's copy this code and paste it back in our new file in Visual Studio Code. So it's going here. And I want to simplify it even further. So I'm going to remove these lines. Let's delete them. And here, for image, I'm simply going to write nginx. I need to make sure that my file is saved, and then in my terminal I'm going to open my tf docker folder. So cd tf docker, and now I am in the folder that contains our Terraform file. So the first thing that we're going to do here is run terraform init. And as you can see in our file, we specified that we're going to use Docker, right? As you can see here, under required providers, we specified Docker. So everything that Terraform needs to work with Docker will be downloaded and initialized. So let's run our command. And as you can see here, it says that Terraform has been successfully initialized. And we can also see that a few more files were created here. Next, we're going to run a command called terraform plan. This command won't run anything by itself, but it's going to specify the game plan. What Terraform will do when we tell it to actually run. So let's try to run this command. So terraform plan, and if we run this, we can see that the plan is to create one new resource. If we scroll up a bit, we can see that specifically it's a Docker container that can be created, and moreover, it's an nginx Docker container. Here we can see all of the properties of the container that can be created, and notice that some information is not known yet. It will only be known after apply. So let's try to understand a little bit better what we have here. As we already know, these lines are the ones that define Docker as a Terraform provider. This is basically what's allowing us to use Docker with Terraform. And here, where it says resource, this is where we're actually defining our resource. So we can see that it is followed by two labels. The first one is the type of the resource, and the type of this resource is a Docker container. And then we need to specify a name for this specific resource. This can be anything you want. And this example uses the name nginx. Then we need to specify a few of the properties of the Docker container that we are defining here. So first we need to specify the image. And in this case, this Docker container is going to be based on the nginx image. We then need to give it a name. And in this case, the name is going to be tutorial. And I want to make a clear distinction here. This is the name of the Terraform resource. And this, on the other hand, this is the name of the Docker container that will be created. You can use the same name for both of them, but you don't have to. We then specify the port forwarding. So under ports, we can see that we have internal and external. And the meaning of this in Terraform syntax is that this port, the external port, on the host machine is going to be forwarded to this port in the new container. So port 8000 in the host is going to be forwarded to port 80 in the container itself. So now that we saw our plan, let's run terraform apply to actually run this plan and create the new container. So this is the command, terraform apply, let's run it. And as you can see, we can see the same plan again, the very same plan that we saw before. And this time it's accompanied by this question: do you want to perform these actions? So we need to type in yes, and then Terraform will actually go ahead and create the new container. So I'm going to type in yes and enter. And we can see here apply complete. And we can see that a new resource was added, one new resource was added, 0 were changed and 0 were destroyed. We can now run docker container ls, and as you can see, we now have a new container here. The image of this container is nginx, and the name of this container is tutorial. And we can also see that port 8000 in the host is forwarded to port 80 within the container. In a similar fashion, we can also run docker image ls, and as you can see, we now have the nginx image. Since we now have an nginx Docker container that's running on our system, we should be able to access the web page that is served by it. So let's open the web browser, and I'll go to localhost, and I need to specify that I want to access port 8000, because this is the port that we are forwarding to port 80 in the container. So :8000, and when we access this page, we can see welcome to nginx. So we got the response from the Docker container. Next, we can run Terraform destroy. So let's run this command. And as you can see, here is the new plan. 0 to add, 0 to change, 1 to destroy. So Terraform created one new resource, which is the Docker container, and now it's going to destroy it. So once again, I need to type in yes, and let's hit enter. And we can see that destroy complete, and one resource was destroyed. If I now run docker container ls, we can see that we have no running containers anymore. Next, I want to split my Terraform code into two different files so it is a little bit more manageable. So let's create a new file, and I'm going to call this new file provider.tf, and here is what I want in this new file. So from main.tf, I'm going to take this piece of code, so I'm going to cut it to remove it from main.tf and move it to provider.tf. And let's paste it here, and let's save both of the files. So let's save this one, and also let's save main.tf, and it's going to work in the very same way. So once again, I'm going to run Terraform apply, and let's hit enter, and you can see that one resource is about to be created. So let's type in yes and enter, and let's run once again docker container ls, and you can see that a Docker container is running again. Next, let's say that I need to make a small change to my configuration. And now, instead of forwarding port 8000, I want to forward port 8080. So this is the kind of changes that can be done very easily. So first, we're not going to need the provider.tf file anymore. Let's close this one. And the only change that we need to do to main.tf is change the external port. So instead of 8000, it's going to be 8080. And all I need to do is save this file. Then we need to run Terraform apply again. And you can see that Terraform is telling us that the port change is forcing a resource replacement. And what it basically means is that the existing resource has to be deleted, and then a new resource has to be created. And this is why the plan is to add one resource and to destroy another resource. So the Docker container that's currently running will be destroyed, and the new one will replace it. So I'm going to type in yes, and let's hit enter. And you can see that one resource was added and another one was destroyed. So let's once again run docker container ls. And this is our container, and we can see that now port 8080 is the one that's forwarded to port 80 in the container. So if I'm going back to my web browser and I try to refresh the page, this is not working anymore because nothing is served on port 8000. But if I change the port from 8000 to 8080, we can see the response from the nginx web server. Next, I want my Docker image to be treated as a separate resource. So this is why here I'm going to define another resource, and the type of this resource is going to be a Docker image. So here I'm going to write Docker image, then we need to give a name to this specific resource. And once again, I'm going to use nginx, and it is completely okay that the name of this resource is the same as the name of this resource, because their types are different. This is a resource of the type Docker image, whereas this is a resource of the type Docker container, so they can have the same name. And now for the Docker image resource, I'm going to specify its name, and the value I'm going to give to its name is the name of the image that I want to use. And in my case, I want to use the nginx image, and specifically the latest tag. So nginx : latest. And now we want to reference this Docker image resource when we are defining our Docker container. So here it's not going to be nginx just hard-coded. So let's remove this. And now we're going to use this resource, the Docker image resource, to define the image that this Docker container will use. So first we need to define the type of the resource that we are going to rely on. And in our case, it's going to be a resource of the type Docker image. So I'm going to write here Docker image. I then need a dot, and then I need to specify the name of the specific resource that I'm going to use. So in my case, it's going to be the nginx resource out of the Docker image type. So this is why here I'm going to write nginx. And out of this resource, we want the name of the image that we are going to use. And to access that, we need to write image_id. So .image id. And while we're at it, let's define another Docker container. So again, I'm first going to define a resource for the image that I'm going to use. So let's copy these lines and duplicate them. And let's say that along with nginx, I also want to use the Apache web server. So the name that I'm going to use for this resource is going to be Apache. Now, the name of the Docker image for the Apache web server is httpd. So this is what I need to write here, because this, once again, needs to be the name of the Docker image that you want to use. And now, just to keep things in order, I want to rename this Docker container. So I don't want to use the name tutorial for this container. Instead of it, I'll use the name nginx1. And now we're going to define another Docker container. So let's copy these lines and duplicate them. And once again, the type of this resource is going to be a Docker container, but we're going to use a different name for this one. So instead of nginx, I'm going to write here Apache. And once again, this is only a name. You could use any name you wanted. Now, what about the image for this container? So once again, we're going to use another resource to define it. So first, we need to specify the type of resource that we're going to rely on. And in this case, it's going to be a Docker image. So let's write Docker image. Then we need a dot. Then we need the name of the specific resource that we are going to use. And in the case of this container, it's going to be this resource, so Apache. And then we need the name of the Docker image, so .imageid. We then need to specify a name for this Docker container. I'm going to use the name Apache1. And of course, we cannot use port 8080 anymore because this one is already in use. So instead of it here, I'm going to use port 8081. And let's save the file. And once again, I'm going to run Terraform apply. And let's hit enter. And you can see that 4 resources are about to be added and 1 is to be destroyed. And if we want to understand why a resource has to be destroyed, we can scroll up a bit and we can see that our nginx Docker container must be replaced. And here we can see the reason. We're now going to use a different name. Instead of tutorial, we're going to use the name nginx1. And this name change forces replacement. So the currently existing resource for the Docker container must be destroyed and it will be replaced by a new one. So once again, I need to type in yes, then hit enter. And if we run now Docker container ls, we can see that we now have 2 new containers. And here we can see their names. One is Apache1 and the other one is nginx1. And here we can see the port forwarding that we defined. So let's go back to the web browser and let's refresh the page. And you can see that we still get the response from the nginx web server. Let's now try to access port 8081. And for this URL, we're getting the response from the Apache web server.